That morning in Austin, a thin rain fell like the city's quiet breath hiding something unseen. Under the pale gray sky, a light brown pickup truck turned into the parking lot outside Emberlight Cafe number 18, where a weathered wooden sign reading "Brewed with Integrity Since 2009" flickered faintly through rain-speckled glass. Graham Ellison sat quietly in the driver's seat, engine still running. He didn't look at his phone, nor reach for the untouched sandwich from the gas station across the street. His hand lightly brushed the faded brim of his baseball cap, pulling it down a little more. On his worn flannel shirt was the name Hank, embroidered in black thread, a borrowed name just enough to blend in. After building the Emberlight empire for over 15 years, this was Graham's first time returning to the front line as a shadow, with no name tag, no director title, no recognition. From his seat behind the fogged window, he watched the morning shift staff begin to move, preparing for opening. Their pace was neither rushed nor slow, but something in their steps caught his attention. Not the usual fatigue after a night shift, nor a lazy rhythm, but a movement born from muscle memory, void of emotion or intent, like repeating a well-worn song no longer believed in. He recalled the latest HR report. This branch had met revenue targets for 3 consecutive quarters but suffered the highest turnover and lowest employee satisfaction scores in the system. This anomaly, unexplained by numbers, was why he was here this morning. As he stepped down from the truck, the rain had eased to a drizzle, just enough to wet the brim of his cap and the cuffs of his faded jeans. Graham adjusted his gait, trying to maintain a slight limp like one who has traveled long roads. The wooden door creaked open. A soft wind chime sounded. No one looked up, no one asked who he was, who he. Only the bell acknowledged his presence, and with it, the quiet beginning of something irreversible. He chose a table against the wall, out of direct sight but with a broad view. Then he saw her, a woman in her early 30s, brown hair tied high, clean but worn apron, faded shirt sleeves. Not striking, but there was something about her he couldn't look away from. Not speed nor urgency, but a silent focus. She worked as if every movement had purpose. Every step knew its direction. Those around her moved without heart, worked without connection. After a while, she approached his table with a small tray, a steaming cup of black coffee, toast, and 2 neatly placed mini jam packets. She set the tray down so gently it made no sound. "Black coffee and toast," she said politely, but kept her distance. "I brought extra butter and jam in case you need." He nodded slightly, keeping a neutral tone like a customer killing time in an empty cafe. "Mornings must be busy. Tips probably good around this time?" The answer didn't come immediately, just a brief flicker in her eyes, not confusion but hesitation. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Then her voice dropped lower than the espresso machine's hum. "The morning shift's rough, especially the tip sharing, but only a few people actually get any." Her words weren't complaints. She spoke as if stating an undeniable fact, not worth fretting over. But to Graham, that was the first crack, a small gap between the company's cultural facade and the reality inside, and he knew behind it lay a system rewritten in the shadows. Graham sat quietly in the corner of the cafe, gently swirling his coffee cup as if savoring a peaceful morning, yet his mind was already piecing things together. That girl Nina not only worked hard, but every action of hers radiated discreet initiative, as if she deeply understood the fine line between being seen and being watched. He noticed how she leaned in to pour more coffee for the next table, how she masked her fatigue with a soft thank you, and how her eyes constantly observed the cafe without drawing attention. But most notably, she never approached the payment counter. Graham glanced at the POS station in the middle of the cafe where 2 young male employees stood side by side. One, named Ethan according to his name tag, wore a neat uniform and had well-groomed hair. The other, Logan, appeared a few years older, standing with crossed arms, neither holding a tray nor engaging with customers except during payments. Ethan focused intently on the screen, occasionally swiping cards, then stepping back as if the POS machine was the center of power during the morning shift. Every transaction, Every electronic tip passed through that machine, and only they touched it. Meanwhile, Nina kept clearing tables, pouring coffee, fetching pastries, and arranging napkins, all with swift movements, but never once heading toward the counter. As Nina walked past, Graham gently asked, like a curious but polite customer, "Why don't you handle payments too?" She didn't stop, her hands still busy clearing dishes, but her voice lowered to almost a whisper, "I don't have access. The system only allows a few people to operate the POS. If your name's not on the list, you won't get tips from cards either." He raised an eyebrow. "Who decides that list?" She glanced at him briefly, then slightly nodded toward the payment counter, behind which was the glass door leading to the branch office. "Riley, the branch manager. He assigns roles in the system." Her voice dropped even lower, like a long-held breath finally released. "Ethan is his nephew, always on the morning shift, always has access." Graham said nothing, only tightened his grip around the coffee cup. The brew point system was designed for transparency, role-based functions, and fair tip distribution. But what he'd just heard wasn't a misunderstanding of the system. It was deliberate manipulation building a hidden layer of power where some bent procedures to favor their relatives. Meanwhile, the hardest-working employees were made invisible. Then the unexpected happened. When Nina set down a bill on a nearby table, she pulled a thin notebook from her apron pocket. Its soft paper cover was curled at the edges, yellowed in the corners, clearly well used. She said nothing, silently placing it before Graham, her eyes neither pleading nor fearful, just a very gentle request. "I'm not complaining. I just need to know I'm not imagining things." So I started recording. Graham opened the notebook. Every page contained clear records: date, table number, total bill, displayed tip amount, and the actual tip she received. Some entries were circled in red, a few marked with question marks. Margin notes in pencil were simple but sharp. This was not an accusation. This was evidence the kind no one ever sees unless they truly want to know. And for the first time in many years, Graham realized he hadn't been asking the right person. Graham sat quietly in the corner of the cafe, gently swirling his coffee cup as if savoring a peaceful morning, yet his mind had already begun to piece things together. That girl Nina not only worked hard, but every action she took radiated discreet initiative, as if she clearly understood the fine line between being seen and being watched. He noticed how she leaned over to pour coffee for the next table, how she masked her fatigue with a soft thank you, and how her eyes constantly observed the cafe without anyone noticing. But most notably, she never approached the payment counter. Graham glanced at the POS station in the middle of the cafe where two young male employees stood side by side. One, named Ethan according to his name tag, wore a neat uniform and had well-groomed hair. The other, Logan, appeared a few years older, standing with crossed arms, neither holding a tray nor engaging with customers except during payments. Ethan focused intently on the screen, occasionally swiping cards, then stepping back as if the POS machine was the center of power during the morning shift. Every transaction, every electronic tip passed through that machine, and only they touched it. Meanwhile, Nina kept clearing tables, pouring coffee, fetching pastries, and arranging napkins, all with swift movements, but never once heading toward the counter. As Nina walked past, Graham gently asked, like a curious but polite customer, "Why don't you handle payments too?" She didn't stop, her hands still busy clearing dishes, but her voice lowered to almost a whisper. "I don't have access. The system only allows a few people to operate the POS. If your name's not on the list, you won't get tips from cards either." He raised an eyebrow. "Who decides that list?" She glanced at him briefly, then slightly nodded toward the payment counter behind which was the glass door leading to the branch office. "Riley, the branch manager. He assigns roles in the system." Her voice dropped even lower, like a long-held breath finally released. "Ethan is his nephew, always on the morning shift, always has access." Graham said nothing, only tightened his grip around the coffee cup. The brew point system was designed for transparency, role-based functions, and fair tip distribution. But what he'd just heard wasn't a misunderstanding of the system. It was deliberate manipulation building a hidden layer of power where some bent procedures to favor their relatives. Meanwhile, The hardest-working employees were made invisible. Then the unexpected happened. When Nina set down a bill on a nearby table, she pulled a thin notebook from her apron pocket. Its soft paper cover was curled at the edges, yellowed in the corners, clearly well used. She said nothing, silently placing it before Graham, her eyes neither pleading nor fearful, just a very gentle request. "I'm not complaining. I just need to know I'm not imagining things." So I started recording. Graham opened the notebook. Every page contained clear records: date, table number, total bill, displayed tip amount, and the actual tip she received. Some entries were circled in red, a few marked with question marks. Margin notes in pencil were simple but sharp. This was not an accusation. This was evidence, the kind no one ever sees unless they truly want to know. And for the first time in many years, Graham realized he hadn't been asking the right person. That afternoon, Graham left Emberlight Cafe number 18 in silence. The rain had stopped, water still pooled on the pavement, and the yellow streetlights had just flickered on. But inside him, a different storm was brewing. He no longer needed another moment of observation. What Nina had given him, every figure, every gap between labor and tip, every role assigned in the shadows, was enough to activate the surveillance machinery of the entire corporation. In his car, as the engine started, he pressed the call button. The line clicked once. "Claire," he said, voice low and steady, "we have a problem." Claire Mendez, head of Emberlight's internal investigations, needed no more explanation. For 7 years, she had helped Graham uncover 3 major internal corruption cases within franchise levels without causing a stir. Whenever he said, "quiet investigation," she acted. "I need you to access the Brewpoint system immediately. Check every role assigned at Branch 18, every electronic tip transfer, every permission change, no noise. I want to see who rebuilt the power-sharing system under the guise of management software." Claire replied curtly, "Understood." Less than an hour later, Brewpoint at Branch 18 was switched to hidden audit mode, a feature reserved only for serious, suspected violations. No one at the cafe noticed. Everything ran as usual. But from the central office, every role assignment, every payment click, every incorrectly shared tip was recorded by the second. By morning, the first report was sent to Graham's office. The first headline struck like a dagger. The system had been altered to add a special permission level called Internal Preferred, invisible on the public management interface. 3 accounts held this permission. Riley Denton, the branch manager, Ethan Denton, a part-time employee, and an anonymous account, Kitchen Support 03. The second line was colder. In the last 30 days, total electronic tips at the branch totaled 4,812 balsols, of which 67% went to Ethan's account, despite him serving fewer than 15% of the tables. The third line forced Graham to look away for a moment. The branch's personnel records listed a kitchen staff named Marcus Hill who had worked 21 of the last 25 morning shifts. But the HR system had no record of anyone by that name. No tax information, no valid Social Security number. When Claire dug deeper, the Social Security number matched an investigation that had been dropped 2 years earlier due to lack of evidence. Coincidentally, the manager at that time was also Riley Denton. But the final blow came from finance. A shell company named Lark Hill Services LLC, registered in another state, had been receiving regular internal fees every Friday, each coinciding with the amount of money vanished from the tip system. On paper, it was a personnel logistics service fee. But the contact information linked back to an old email address Riley had used before becoming manager. Everything added up. This was no longer a matter of unfair tip distribution. This was a deliberately constructed scheme to manipulate a system with layers of disguise and intent. Graham knew that sometimes favoritism in organizations was just a vague feeling. But this time, he faced a sophisticated fraud machine, operated by the silence of an entire collective. And Nina, with her thin paper notebook, had lit up that dark room. It was time not just to watch, but to speak out. The next morning, in the 12th floor office of Emberlight's headquarters in Austin, Graham sat pensively before 3 charts on a large screen. Claire was presenting the data. The first chart showed unusual tip distribution, a cluster of red almost entirely focused on the name Ethan Denton. The second chart revealed unauthorized access over time breaches consistently occurring each morning, always before opening hours. And the last chart detailed the shadow account, Kitchen Support 3. No name, no personnel ID, no valid payroll record. Graham leaned back in his chair, needing no further explanation. What he saw was no longer a mere mistake. It was a carefully orchestrated manipulation campaign, led by the very person entrusted to protect the process. He ordered all access rights for Riley Denton and Ethan Denton to be locked down, shifting all monitoring to live mode. More importantly, he insisted that all evidence remain confidential, no internal emails, no accusation lists. If the system had been quietly sabotaged, its restoration must also come quietly but decisively. The next step was not merely correction. It had to be a fight to reclaim core values. Transparency could not be a slogan on the wall. It had to be present in every card swipe, every money split, every role assigned correctly. Then Friday arrived. At 9:02 a.m., right during the cafe's busiest moment, inside Emberlight Cafe number 18, the smell of waffles and espresso blended with the air, the coffee machine hummed steadily and spoons tapped lightly against glass cups in rhythmic harmony. Nina was still on the floor, her steps steady, her apron stained with coffee after the first rush. She didn't glance at the clock or worry about where the big boss was. She worked as she always did, quietly, precisely, without complaint. At the counter, Ethan stood before the POS machine, operating with unusual skill. Every tap on the screen was like piano keys played evenly, expertly, and with overconfidence. Nearby, Riley leaned against the bar counter wearing a crisp white shirt, a neatly adjusted dark gray tie, smiling formally while chatting with a regular older customer. None of them noticed anything unusual. Everything seemed normal until the door opened. Graham entered, no longer wearing the faded cap or limping gait. He wore a charcoal gray suit, the same outfit he'd worn on the day the system's 50th branch opened. Behind him came Claire, holding a tablet ready to display live Brewpoint surveillance. No one spoke. No bell rang. But the cafe fell silent, as if someone had flipped an invisible switch. Riley straightened. The smile vanished from his lips. Ethan froze, his POS screen still showing an active login. Graham approached the counter, placed his hand firmly on the wooden surface without hesitation. He did not shout. His voice was gentle, a reminder, but each word weighed like a stone. I have said, fairness is not a slogan. It is a behavior repeated daily. Then he looked Riley straight in the eye. And here, someone has rewritten the rules. Claire activated her tablet. 3 charts appeared showing distorted tip distribution, excessive access rights, and a history of transfers to the shell company Larkhill Services LLC. No names were needed. Riley recognized immediately. Ethan tried to speak, but one look from Graham silenced him instantly. You received 67% of the tips this month, Graham said, not because you served more, but because you hold the key to a door others don't even know exists. The cafe fell completely silent. Nina, tray still in hand, stood upright for the first time all shift. A new employee nervously stepped back, eyes scanning the room. From the kitchen, a cook appeared, arms crossed, silent but clearly had been waiting for this moment a long time, and Graham knew the time had come. No one spoke, yet everyone waited. The atmosphere inside Emberlight Cafe number 18 was like a song paused on a choking note, tense enough that a single wrong word could shatter the quiet facade that had lasted so long. Graham no longer looked at the charts. He had seen enough. Instead, he slowly scanned the room, pausing on each face, each pair of eyes not to find the culprit, but to see who still believed in what was right. He turned to Riley. From this moment, he said evenly, you are suspended. Your file will be forwarded directly to the legal department. Ethan as well. Then he turned, sweeping his gaze across everyone. We do not keep those who distort transparency for personal gain. No applause followed, no cheers. This was not a victory, but a release. The weight in the room was not fear, but something else, like a door opening after months of being shut. Nina, still holding a tray, nodded slightly, not in thanks, but as a confirmation that she had seen and believed. Graham didn't leave immediately. He walked slowly to the POS counter where Ethan was just pulling his employee card from the reader. "From today," he said, his voice no louder than the espresso machine humming, "this system will no longer be controlled by a few familiar names. Whoever works will be recorded. Whoever serves will be rewarded." He pointed to the back of the cafe where a young man stood hesitating, still holding a towel. "What's your name?" "Jalen," the young man replied, surprised to be addressed. "Jalen, from now on, you will be the first to use the Brewpoint system with the new protocol." Slowly but surely, the young man approached the POS, logging in with his own ID for the first time, without asking permission or borrowing access from anyone else. The screen displayed his real name, actual shifts, real roles. No more kitchen support 3, no more support staff. Everything showed as it should. Claire, standing nearby, opened a second interface on her tablet, a live monitoring dashboard of other branches. Blue bars indicated transparent tip flows, interspersed with red dots signaling areas showing signs of similar fraud systems. The inspection didn't stop at branch 18. It expanded across the entire system quietly but precisely. Riley and Ethan made no resistance. They knew the game was over. Ethan removed his employee card and handed it to Graham. He did not put it away but placed it on the counter where everyone could see. Then Graham faced the crowd. "From now on, no more hidden titles, no more backdoor privileges. Those who serve will be seen. Those who contribute will be recognized." Still no applause, but everyone stood a little straighter. Eyes no longer averted. They had not been given something new, but reclaimed what was rightfully theirs. And Graham knew. What had just happened was more than handling violations. It was a reboot, not of software, but of trust. A new system had begun, not coded in lines of data, not displayed in quarterly reports, but living deeper in the eyes of those who once felt invisible. No one left their place, but the way they stood, the way they looked at each other, and the charged silence in the air, it was all different now. Graham no longer needed to say a word. He understood clearly that no declaration, no nod or a pointing finger had changed the atmosphere in the cafe. It was the moment Jalen logged in, his name appearing clearly and legitimately for all to see. That was the first time in many months that a real person was recognized by real data. Claire lightly tapped the screen. The old access cards were revoked. Ethan disappeared from the POS list. Riley no longer had override privileges, but what caught Graham's attention wasn't the technical actions, but the human reactions. Nina, for a moment, let go of the tray in her hands and breathed out not quite a sigh of relief, but more like releasing a burden she had carried too long. She said nothing. No words were needed. A new employee approached, gently touched Nina's arm, not to ask or request help, but a quiet, human gesture, wordless, but meaningful. Graham saw it, and he knew Nina was no longer alone. She wasn't the only one who saw what was wrong, nor the only one brave enough to silently hold on to what was right. He understood that the real reform wasn't in the software. It was in people looking at each other as human beings with names, with contributions, and with the right to be seen. Minutes later, Riley stepped out of the office for the last time. No excuses, no adjusted smiles. He glanced at Ethan, not with blame, not with instruction, but with a silent nod acknowledging the curtain had fallen. Ethan removed his card and left. No one stopped him. No one saw him off. His departure was not a tragedy. It was simply what had to happen when a system decided to become honest. Graham placed that card on the brightest spot on the counter, hiding it nowhere. Then he turned to the remaining staff, looking at each person with eyes that did not judge but silently conveyed. "You are not forgotten. From now on, every service will be recorded. Every presence will be acknowledged. This is not a patchwork fix. This is the new standard. No applause followed. They simply returned to work. But their steps were firmer, their communication clearer, and the atmosphere no longer pressed down like every morning before. Graham left without hurry. He gave no motivational speech or reminders, but he knew the message had been delivered in another way. He did not bring a speech. He brought a beginning. 4 weeks passed. Each new day at Emberlight Cafe number 18 no longer began with doubt in the eyes of the staff or weary steps that expected nothing from the system. Instead, the cafe now opened with the scent of lightly browned butter on toast, the clinking of ceramic cups against saucers, and a new sound Graham had hoped to hear. The soft chime from the tip distribution screen, ringing each time a server was clearly recognized. No more whispers in the break room asking, "Did those tips disappear somewhere?" No more hiding notebooks in apron pockets or folding receipts to check after shifts. Now, whoever served appeared clearly. No blurring, no misassigned roles, no vague kitchen support or forgotten additional staff. Each tip distribution was displayed openly, attached to the actual employee ID, encoded with service history, and cross-checked against working hours. The interface was simple but foolproof. No loophole for anyone behind the screen to rewrite the story. But the biggest change wasn't in the software. It was in the people who once doubted their own value. Nina no longer had to manage 12 tables alone during peak hours. She now walked more steadily, not because she was tired, but because she was confident. She was no longer just a regular server. She was now a regional trainer, tasked with expanding the transparent tip-sharing model to the system's older branches. She didn't carry PowerPoint slides, nor a manual. She carried a story quiet but powerful. And somehow that story made staff elsewhere begin to feel truly seen. At branch 42, a new employee named Eliana sent Nina a short message. "Sister Nina, I just want to say thank you. The first day I saw my name on the tip screen, I cried. I never thought I was allowed to exist." At branch 17, a part-time worker who had once quit returned. She didn't demand anything special. She just said, "I don't need more. I just don't want to be erased." The end-of-month report arrived at headquarters. Claire summarized the data. The turnover rate across the system dropped by 18%. But Graham didn't underline that figure. What he circled in red was the last line of the internal feedback form, a quietly added new question, without flashy titles or calls to action. Simply, "Do you feel seen in your work?" No algorithm could measure that. No dashboard could display it. But Graham knew that feeling was what kept a company alive. Not slogans, not profit margins, but people. And finally, they had begun to be seen. No entourage, no checklist. That morning, Graham Ellison returned to Emberlight Cafe number 18 alone. He opened the door with bare hands, letting the wooden bell ring softly in the bright space. No one looked up immediately, and he liked it that way. He didn't want to be recognized. He just wanted to sit where he always had, the corner table by the window where the sunlight was no longer murky like that first day, but clear and straightforward, just as everything was now laid out openly. He ordered a serving of pancakes and black coffee. There was no special ritual. The server that day was not Nina. She was near the counter, guiding a group of new staff on how to confirm access rights before their shift. She didn't need to speak loudly. Her voice was calm, clear, not authoritative by power, but weighty from the quiet confidence that had become her credibility. Graham didn't linger long. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as if trying to remember the details once overlooked. On the POS screen, staff names appeared with every service. Jalen M., Table 12, $9 tip. Eliana R., Table 7, $14 tip. Everything was clear enough that no one needed to verify. The system was finally doing what it should have done from the start, accurately recording the right person at the right time and in the right way. Before leaving, Graham pulled out a $20 bill and gently placed it under the half-eaten pancake plate. Beneath it was a small, handwritten note, the familiar italicized script. "Thank you for recording everything when everyone else looked away. You're not alone anymore, and no one will be left alone again." Nina found that note at the end of her shift while clearing tables. She didn't open it immediately. She just looked at it and breathed out softly, not a sigh, but an acknowledgement that something had been completed. That night, in a small apartment on the second floor of the South End neighborhood, she took out the old notebook, the one that had once been her only escape during days she felt unseen. The pages were faded, ink blurred by months. She didn't reread it. She didn't need to. Instead, she carefully tore out each page, neatly stacked them, and placed them into a brown envelope with a single phrase printed on the front. "For the next person if someday you need proof that you're not crazy for seeing what others pretend not to see." The envelope had no name, no signature, but it sat on the desk of a new branch manager, the next place to implement the comprehensive, transparent system. No fanfare, no speeches, just a quiet act. Because Nina no longer needed that notebook. Now, the system remembered for her at the right time, for the right people. Nina's old notebook, once hidden every morning inside her apron, now lay quietly sealed in an envelope, no longer trembling with fear of being discovered, no longer a piece of evidence carrying anger, but becoming a message for the next person. "You are not crazy for seeing what's wrong, and you are not alone." She told no one about leaving the notebook behind. There was no need. People don't always have to shout to create change. Sometimes change begins with a quiet action, like someone deciding to record injustices, not to accuse, but to hold on to the feeling that truth still matters. For Nina, justice was never a reward. It was not something granted after pleading. Nor was it a policy to be printed and hung on a wall like a decorative slogan. It was a commitment, a repeated choice even when no one was watching. She understood that justice doesn't always come from chance. It comes from having the courage not to turn away, the patience to keep recording, and the faith that one day, truth will be heard. And then, somewhere in a small cafe, newly adopting the system, a new employee named Maya opened that envelope, read the simple phrase on the cover, and realized the story she faced was not hers alone. She didn't know Nina, but Maya, like Nina a year before, began recording what she saw not out of suspicion, but to protect the integrity being rebuilt from scratch. At Emberlight headquarters, Graham quietly read through monthly internal feedback. He wasn't looking for praise, nor expecting complex proposals. He sought one sentence: "I feel seen." Because he understood no performance metric was stronger than that feeling. No revenue was sustainable if employees felt invisible. One early morning, Graham stood by the glass window of his office, looking down on the still sleepy city. He knew there would always be someone quietly recording the unusual, and now they wouldn't have to hide their notebooks in their aprons anymore. The system had learned to listen not because it was more modern, but because the people inside it had changed. The world doesn't turn by one grand decision. It changes because of people like Nina, those who don't give up, even if all they have is a pen, a notebook, and a small belief that justice still has a way back. One server, one tip, one real name. That's how the system is restored. And that's how the world begins to change, one person at a time, one small act, but real enough not to be erased. In a world driven by data and structure, what makes an organization truly sustainable is not software or processes, but that people are seen, recognized for their true value. What Graham changed was not just a manipulated POS system, but the way an entire business relearns to listen. And Nina, with her old notebook, became the purest image of quiet courage, not resisting with noise, but with consistent action without retreat. If you believe fairness begins by daring to acknowledge the small things, please like this video and subscribe to never miss real, human stories that inspire change. Comment the phrase, "seen and valued," if you believe every effort deserves recognition, even in places where no one expects to be watched.